There's the famous first Rashi, which is a Midrash, which Rashi quotes. The Torah begins, Bereishis bara Elokim, Eisah Shemayim v'Sa'aretz. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. And there's always a question, what exactly was the objective of creation? Why did God create existence? You think, I always say, when they sent up the Hubble telescope to take the first pictures and the pictures came back to Earth. I remember the first picture that was taken was 1 million miles of space dust out in this endless darkness. That's what the picture that came back. I mean, if you believe in God and you believe God created this world, it borders on the infinite. Every level of existence, every representation of whatever exists. And there's a famous word from the Maharal of Prague. He has one of his works, it's called Gevuros Hashem, the power of God. And he quotes the pasuk, the verse in Tehillim, where David says, Mi yamalel Gevuros Hashem yashmei kol tiloso. Mi yamalel Gevur, who could express the power of God, yashmei kol tiloso, to make known all his praise. So he explains it this way. Even if you go and you analyze one aspect of creation, the level of divine genius that exists within that is beyond human capacity. Because God's genius is infinite, and we have limitation. We're limited. Mi yamal Gevuros Hashem, who could utter the power of God? Whatever we understand, it's considered infinitesimal in terms of what actually it is. That's mi yamal Gevuros Hashem. Who could utter the power of God? Yashmiya kol tiloso. And even if, let's say, you could understand what you see based on the analysis, but in terms of our awareness of what exists, let's say we're at one place in existence. There's so many other locations in existence we're not even aware they even exist. And what about, even if you're aware of whatever exists, that's only on the terrestrial level? What about the subterranean level? What about the celestial level? So even if you do understand what you see, but in terms of the total picture, it's beyond your grasp. So this is what David means to say, Mi yamal Gevuros Hashem yashmei kol tiloso. Who could utter the power of God? And even if you could explain it and understand it, yashmei kol tiloso, could you speak all his praise? It's not possible, so we're not aware of what even exists. That's the Maharal's explanation of that pasuk in Tehillim, what David is actually saying. So God creates this existence, which borders on the infinite. We're not even aware of what exists. And even what we're aware of, we have an infinitesimal understanding of what it is. Now, why did he create all this? We always find that when Hashem spoke to the Avos, HaKadoshim, the holy patriarchs, he says, your children be like the stars of the heaven. Just as the stars of heaven, you're not able to count, you're not aware of the number, identically, your children will not be able to be quantified. We're not talking about physical quantification, we're talking about innate quantification, qualitative quantification. It's not possible. The Mishnah tells us in Sanhedrin, if you save one Jew, it's like you saved the whole world. One Jew. It doesn't say if you save one Gentile, it's saving the whole world. One Jew. Why one Jew and why not 8 billion non-Jews? One Jew his innate value is more than 8 billion people. Why? Now, the question is, why did God create this existence? Why? The first 3 words of the Torah gives it away. Bereishis bara Elokim. So Rashi cites the Midrash, Bereishis bara Elokim, Bishvil Yisrael Shel Bereishis. God created this world for the sake of the Jewish people who are referred to as the chosen. They are the Bereishis. They are, qualitatively speaking, they are the most special. Bishvil Torah Shel Bereishis. For the sake of Torah, that's also the ultimate. So the objective of creation, its value is the Torah, that this is the playing field for the Torah, and the only nation that has relevance to the Torah are the Jewish people. That's Bereishis bara Elokim Yismayim Besoretz. Now, the Ramchal speaks at length about this, based on a verse in Tehillim. David Melech says, Olam Chesed Yiboneh. Why did God create existence? Well, we're discussing now very fundamental concepts. Why did God create existence? Olam Chesed Yiboneh. He created existence because it was his level of kindness on an absolute level. Chesed. Chesed means if a person does an act which he's deserving to be rewarded, that you give him, you compensate him for his effort or involvement, is not chesed. It is to a degree, but it's not chesed on the absolute level. Why? Because you deserve to receive what you accomplished based on what you achieved. Chesed means there is no basis why God should do anything. If you pass a person, you've never seen him before, and you put money in a box for the needy to take, whatever that may be, whatever they need it for, you're doing an act of chesed. These people you never saw, you will never know who they are. And there's no reason why you have to any degree, accommodate whatever their lack is. That's chesed. But even there, it's not so simple. That's chesed, because a person does that because he has a need, because he wants to help others. So to a degree, he's really doing for himself because he has a need. You're walking down the street to see a homeless person, and the person touches you. Because he touches you, therefore, you try to do something to help him. So that's you're doing for yourself. When we speak God doing chesed, God is complete on an absolute level. It's purely for the sake of the beneficiary. That's what God's chesed is. Before existence was created, nothing existed but God himself. He created the human being, that if he meets the challenges of existence which God presents to him, he's worthy, he's deserving of reward, and the reward is having a relationship with him, who's the infinite being, who is absolute on every level of absoluteness. That is the reward. That's the chesed. So Ramchal asks a question: if that's the case, why does God have to create a setting of challenges? God should have created the soul and let that soul be exposed to his being, his existence. So the Ramchal explains, Rabbi Butzatu explains, that every relationship is based on compatibility, and compatibility is based on commonality. And when God does anything, any action God does is attributed to himself. It's not attributed to anybody but himself. If a human being would naturally do good and really has no choice but to do good, that means that action is not attributed to himself, but it's only due to the way he was created, or something which is external. The only way the human being has a likeness to God, and that's what we spoke of in the reading, which we read this week. But Elokim that God was created in man was created in God's image, meaning man has the ability to make choices. Just as God, whatever he does, it's because he chose to do so. Man, whatever we do, it's because we have the ability to choose, to do or not to do. And if the action is only a result of that choice, we're actually demonstrating God's profile of action only due to because you chose to do that. So that creates that likeness, that commonality, which allows that you should be able to cleave to him, because now, to a greater degree, so you should be a greater beneficiary of that relationship with him. That's how the Ramchal, Rabbi Lutzatu, explains it. So God created this existence, that man should be put in a situation with challenges, and it's only due to your choice that you chose to do good or no good, or bad, evil. That's why that action came about. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Tshuva, in the Laws of Tshuva, The man was created in this and put in a certain location at an equally distant point from good and evil. It's up for man to take initiative to go to the right or go to the left. And therefore, as a result of that, if you choose to do the right, despite the challenge, the result of the good is attributed to you. And if you choose to go to the left, to the negative, nothing forced you to do that, that negative is attributed to the person. And the person, as a result of that, is culpable for his action. And based on the level of challenge, the degree of challenge, that will determine the level of worthiness of the person. Based on difficulty, that determines the level of reward. I always say you have two people. Person is literally nearly impoverished. Another person has tremendous wealth. And both of them give $1 to a person who's truly needy. And in terms of the recipient, the beneficiary, it's the identical benefit to the person who receives it. But in terms of the benefactor, the man who has very little, and despite that, he gives his $1, and the man who has endless dollars who gives the $1, there's no comparison between what one person is doing, the other person is doing. So the one who gives the $1, despite the fact that he barely can afford to give the $1, his level of achievement is much greater than the one who gave it more easily, because the challenge wasn't as great. The challenge determines qualitatively what the action is, but that's the choice. And God sets all choices. Nobody's put in a position where he has a choice only because he needs that choice for the development of his spirituality, what we call this neshama, to fully flesh it out based on these challenges. And only God knows why those challenges are necessary for that particular profile of neshama. That's the concept. You know, we said many times the name of the Rav Chaim Volozhiner. These are all basic Kabbalistic sources. The Maharal, the Ramchal, they all speak about this. And they quote the same words of David HaMelech, King David, where he says, "Hamachadish tu v'chol yom tov ma'aseh Bereishis." Every day, every moment is a renewal of creation. Although the world is, according to Jewish belief, 5,785 years since the beginning of creation, that's when God initially brought about the ex nihilo process. He took it from nothingness to reality of creation. But every moment from then till now, it's an ongoing, the process of creation is ongoing. Why? Because just as God initially said, let there be, whatever he said, let there be. And due to that let there be, and what manifested itself was existence, God is still saying, let it be. So therefore, creation is an ongoing process of coming into being. And we say every day in Bichas Kriya Shema, the first blessing of Shema, we say, Machadish tu v'choyim tamasa Bereishis. God renews every single day the act of creation. It's an ongoing process. He wills creation continuously. That means there's an energy flow. As initially there was an energy flow from him, which allowed it to go from a certain level into to be actualized in the physical. That process is continuous. It goes from a certain level to the actual physical level. But that level, the process goes from the spiritual, and it manifests itself through many levels of conversion until it's converted into the physical. We have mentioned many times that, just in the general sense, the four worlds. There's a world which is called the most ethereal world. It's called Olam Atzilus. The word Atzilus means, in Hebrew, the word Eitzel means next to. Eitzel in Hebrew, Eitzel. It's the world, God created a world which is closest to where he is, as we say, Kavayochel. And then after there's a world Atzilus, there's a word called Olam Habriya, a world of creation. The world of creation that goes from, relatively speaking, from the ex nihilo into being, but it's raw spiritual energy. That's Bria. Olam HaYitzira, which we find these terms in this week's reading, Vayitzer, God formed. he took this energy and he formed it, and he created a die, a cast. That's called Olam Yetzirah. The physical world is referred to as Olam HaAsiyah. It's the world of reality. That's the physical world. But the world of Asiyah only exists because there's a continuous energy flow through all these various levels of development, from the Atzilus to the Bria to the Yetzirah to the Asiyah. And that is a continuous flow. Now, relatively speaking, how many stars are there in the galaxies? And what are these stars? And what do they exactly represent? We have no idea. The numbers cannot be quantified. What do we need? You have so many granules of sand in existence. You have so many species of vegetation. You have areas in existence where man never walked. There's sea creatures under the water, which humans don't even know they exist. What is the value of all this? What is it all about? So the Ramchal explains in one location that for the world to exist and to have a certain balance, to be able to achieve what it has to achieve, there has to be certain levels of representation of many things, good, evil, and many forces, and all these physical representations, whether it's number, whether it's species, even though we're not aware, things which are subterranean, the center of the earth, we have no idea what's there, but it has to exist for the whole operation, spiritual operation, to function. That's what it's all about. So this all goes into Bereishis bara Elokim. Just as the Torah itself is infinite, because it's God's wisdom. And when the Jews sold, the Ramchal cites the Zohar, that the greatest angel is not able to fathom the makeup of the Jewish soul. Why? We mentioned many times that the Jewish soul and the non-Jewish soul, it's a different neshama. It's a different soul. The Jewish soul, our souls come about because we are descendants of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, of the holy patriarchs. They themselves were endowed with a special neshama because of certain choices which they made, which among the 7 nations of the world, they did not make those choices. Therefore, they were endowed with a soul which emanates, whatever this means, from Tachas Kisei HaKavod, from under the heavenly throne of God. That's where these souls emanate from. Angels, which we discuss in a moment, were created on the second day of creation. They come from a lower level. And because they come from a lower level, they're not able to fathom something which is above them. It's like out of their reach. Therefore, for them, it's not within their capacity even to comprehend their relevance of what the makeup of neshama is. The Torah itself is God's wisdom. Only the Torah itself is able to flesh out and develop the Jewish soul. Nothing else. A non-Jew doesn't have Torah. A non-Jew, as we mentioned, only has 7 Noahide laws. The Noahide laws are all negative commandments, which all, in their essences, don't cross lines. Don't compromise what I've given you. That's what Noahide laws are. There's no advancement. There's no spiritual completion. You don't complete yourself. It's not your action brings about a degree of perfection. Don't imperfect it. Don't damage it. That's the Noahide law. The Jewish soul, we were given 248 positive commandments to advance it at various levels through the mitzvahs of the Torah, which is God's wisdom, which has relevance to the infinite, and only through that are we able to cleave to God and have that share in the world to come. That's the concept. Take another breather. In terms of allegories, this person comes to a rabbi, and he was raised traditionally, and he was raised that, Jew has to keep dietary laws. He comes to the rabbi, he says, Rabbi, could you explain to me why you have to keep dietary laws? So the rabbi says, I want to ask you a question first, before I try to explain it to you. Are you aware of Einstein's theory of relativity? He says, I'm aware of it. He says, do you understand it? He says, no. He says, first, I'm not endowed. I have no background in physics. And you have to have a mind, which is a superior mind, to be able to relate to that. And it's beyond my grasp. Therefore, I don't understand it. So the rabbi says to this person, he says, I want to ask you a question. If your mind is so limited that you can't comprehend or understand Einstein's theory of relativity, do you think you're able to understand God's mind when he endowed us with laws which have to do with the spirituality, which have relevance to the infinite? Do you think you'd be able to understand that? No, but you have to understand. Why do you have 4 chambers in your heart? Why do you have so many stars in existence? Why this, why that? We have no understanding. Even if you have a level of understanding, because you're privy to certain Kabbalistic relating to the infrastructure of existence, how it corresponds to the spirituality of the Jew, it's still, you're left in a quandary. Now, there's a beautiful word from the Vilna Gaon. We say when we have to keep shofar, there's one verse we speak about, we quote from David, that King David says, I rejoice over your laws as if I came upon great spoils. It's a verse we mentioned when we have to keep shofar. Soton, kras soton, the letters for each one of the verses spell tear, soton meaning obliterate his prosecution. Kras soton. So the sin, the verse for the sin is Sosa no. I rejoice over your laws as if I come upon great spoils. So the Vilna Gaon explains it with an allegory, with a moshel. There's a king, and he has a dedicated subject, which brought him tremendous glory throughout the king's reign. And the king says to his subject, I'm going to reward you something which no commoner has ever had. I have my treasury, my storehouse, I have certain precious vessels and items which no commoner, his eyes ever set upon them. The value, the beauty is one of a kind. And to show you my appreciation, I'm going to let you go in there for 10 minutes. And during that 10-minute period, you take anything you want. And what you take out of that treasury location has infinite value. But I want to tell you something in advance, give you good advice. When you go in there, you're going to be so mesmerized, it's overwhelmed with the beauty and the innate value. You're not going to immediately start grabbing them. And you can be wasting precious time, because the moment the buzzer goes off, you're out of there. You have 10 minutes from the time you go in till you go out. Therefore, the moment you go in, just keep taking and taking and taking. Because after 10 minutes, you're out. So the Vilna Gaon says, David HaMelech lived exactly 70 years. We know. Adam was meant to live 1,000 years when he was created. God showed Adam every future generation, every soul that's going to be born into existence till the end of time. And Hashem had showed Adam a soul, which was a very, very special neshama. And Adam says to Hashem, who is the soul? So Hashem says the soul is a very special soul, but it's only meant to live a few hours. And then the child's going to die. Adam says, I'm willing to give 70 years of my life to that soul, that person should be able to live 70 years. Therefore, Adam initially was meant to live 1,000 years, but he only lived 930 years because he had given 70 years to David HaMelech. David HaMelech chai v'kayom. It's interesting. I'd said once that the bracha which Yaakov had given to Ephraim and Manasseh, Yosef was the most special son of Yaakov. And he had two sons, Ephraim and Nashu, who were born in Egypt. And when Yosef became aware that his father was dying, he had taken them to receive a bracha from Yaakov. And he said to them, the bracha he had given to them was, V'yidgu l'rov b'ker b'aretz. They should proliferate in the land like the fish in the sea. V'yidgu. He didn't say v'yirbu b'aretz. They should just increase in number. Use the term v'yidgu. The word yidgu comes from the word dogim. A dog is a fish. You should proliferate like fish. So Rashi over there cites the Midrash. Why did Yaakov use the term fish rather than say you should be numerous? So he explains because fish are not subject to the evil eye. Why are they not subject to the evil eye? Because they're covered by the water. Man's eye does not come upon the fish. So just as the fish are not subject to the evil eye, Yosef's children are not subject to the evil eye. That's one interpretation Rashi cites from the Midrash. The other interpretation is just as fish, the way they proliferate are in endless numbers, your children should also proliferate in endless numbers. Those are the two interpretations Rashi cites based on the Midrash. I said then, we find that in time of the Mabul, of the great flood, when God destroyed the world, the Gemara tells us, based on the verses of the Psukim, that it was the only things that were destroyed were only things on the terrestrial level, but only what was on land, which had relevance to land. The creatures in the sea were not destroyed during the great flood. So the fish in the sea were the same. They originated, their origin was from the original creation, the fish in the sea. The species that existed post-flood, those were the species in the ark, which showed that the species that came out of the ark, it was the beginning of a new creation. That was a new creation. That was not part of the original creation. It wasn't a continuum of the original creation, which we'll discuss in Parshas Noach. It was not a continuum. The fish in the sea is a continuum of the original creation. We find that during the first pre-flood, man lived 700-800 years. After the great flood, the life expectancy wasn't so long, 70, 80 years. The Avos HaKadoshim, the patriarchs, lived extraordinarily long, which wasn't the usual. The bracha that Yaakov had given his grandchildren was they should be like the fish, just as the fish were part of the original creation, which had in its innate value was greater than post-flood. Your children should have those qualities of the fish, which is the original creation of God. It's not part of a new creation, the equivalent of what came out of the ark. The qualitative value of Adam's years. Adam was the handiwork of God. The years that Adam were given, endowed with, those years were the most special years ever given, endowed during creation. Because he was the first human being. He took those 70 years and gave it to David. David, after the patriarchs, is considered the most special Jew who ever lived. Who will achieve what Adam did not achieve? Adam was given a challenge not to eat of the tree of knowledge. He failed. Ultimate, who's going to bring about the end of evil? Mashiach ben David. When Mashiach ben David, when the Messiah, the descendant of David, will present himself, all evil will be expunged from existence. Will not be. So Adam had given 70 years of his life that ultimately part of his life, his endowment, corrected his failing. Although he failed, the Jewish people became Adam, as we discussed many, Atem Kruim Adam, your classification is Adam. But in that Adam, there's one individual called David ben Yishai. David, the son of Yishai, he will be the one who's going to be to conquer Israel, to be the one to build, his son will build the Beis Hamikdash, which ultimately which has relevance to bring about the ultimate God's glory, which unfortunately was destroyed twice. But by Shlishi, the third temple will be brought about through the what? Expungement of evil. That's David ben Yishai. That's the 70 years that Adam had given David a melech. The Ramchal writes, I just saw this before Shoshana this year, in one of his writings, in multiple of his writings, but it's not part of the Derech Hashem or the Das Funos. And he writes that if you have a tree, let's say, the California redwoods, person has an axe, and he starts hacking with the axe at the base of the tree. One individual, as much as you hack, you're not going to weaken the base of the tree enough that the tree should fall. It's not going to happen. But let's say you have people, generation after generation coming, and everybody hacks at the base of the tree. Eventually, that tree is going to fall. So he says something interesting. Adam's challenge initially was not to eat of the tree of knowledge. And God said to him, I created a world that's nearly perfect. Don't destroy it. And if you meet the challenge and you don't eat of the tree of knowledge, you bring the world to perfection. If not, you fail, you destroy the world. And what you could have achieved in hours, in a moment, it's going to take 6,000 years to achieve. And only within that 6,000 year period are you going to be able to correct what you undermined and to advance to a level that it's going to be able to achieve perfection. So he explains that from Sinai going forward, every generation, it's within that capacity. If we meet challenges to some degree, we're weakening the evil that Adam brought about, which introduced the existence through his ingestion of that tree of knowledge. Every generation. And that's when we speak about the God determines the year on Rosh Hashanah, that means that generation, the people live during that year, they have the capacity through their choices to weaken that evil and to bring the world closer to completion. And he says something interesting. Let's talk about the generation of Rabbi Akiva. Generation of Rabbi Akiva were given certain abilities to achieve that. But they didn't have the ability to bring it about totally. It's like the person hacking away at the tree. He says, by the end of time, when it will be time for Mashiach to come, all the generations from Sinai all the way till then are all contributing parties who contributed to the expungement of the evil. Because all the hacking through all the generations, that tree will fall, that evil will be expunged, because through all the contributions, which every generation contributed by making their choices, which were appropriate choices. That's the Ramchal. Mishvil Torah Shenichus Reishis. God created the world for the sake of Torah. The playing field, everything that exists within existence, exists because it has relevance to the challenges to bring about the perfection which is meant to be brought about through the Torah itself. The only people who have the capacity to be able to meet those challenges are only the Jewish people. Now, we asked the question in the past. Every morning we say bracha before we study the Torah. If a person gets an aliyah, we say, God chose us among all the nations, and He gave us His Torah. Throughout Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, we just had the regalim, the festivals. You've chosen us from all the nations. You loved us, you desired us. You elevated among us from all the nations who speak different languages. You sanctify us with your mitzvahs. When you brought us, our king, close to your service. So I ask the question. You have a deal, and you're trying to sell the deal. You go try to sell it to many people. You have no takers. They all say, we're not interested. Then you go to one person, I got a special deal for you. I've chosen you because you're special. And the person takes the deal. After everybody turns it down, is that cause that he chose this person? He had no choice. If existence was only created, if the item only has value, because you have to have a buyer, and you're the only buyer, you made a choice. That's not a choice. You chose that person. If every nation turned down the Torah, as we just read in Zosah Bracha, he offered it to the Edomites, he offered it to the Arabs, to Yishmael. They all said, we're not interested. Finally comes to the Jewish people, says, do you want my Torah? We'll grab it. We accept it unequivocally. How did he choose us? But continuously, the bracha on Torah is Hashem b'chabonu. Ata v'char Torah b'kol ha'amin. You've chosen us. What kind of choice is this? You couldn't unload it on anybody else, so you unloaded on us. How's that a choice? It was maybe when he came to the Edomites, what did he say? He says, I have a Torah for you. My Torah. They asked, what's it all about? So Hashem said to the Edomites, it says in the 10th commandment, it says, Lo tirtzah. You should not commit murder. They said, no, doesn't fit into our lifestyle. We have a blessing for our patriarch. We live by the sword. Comes to Yishmael, and Yishmael asks the Ishmaelites, what does it say? It says, Lo tinof. Not permitted to be involved in incest, adultery. Doesn't fit our lifestyle. So the question is, if Hashem would have said to Edom, it says, that's what it says in the 10 Commandments. Honor your father and mother. Esav, regarding honoring his father, was more advanced than Yaakov. He would have grabbed it. And Yishmael, with certain things, he was very attuned to it. So why did God say, presented in a way, in a context that he should reject it? He could have said something that made it very attractive. The answer is because God understood these people have no relevance to it. And again, as he said, they shouldn't have a claim later, why did you offer it to us? But he could have offered in the context that it would have been very attractive. Or specifically that they should not, was only the Jews have relevance to what the Torah is all about. That's Hashem b'chabonu v'kol ha'amin. V'nos alonis t'roso. You've chosen us for all the nations because only we have that capacity to have relevance, to have their relationship with God. Because again, we have a different profile of neshama, which only that neshama has relevance to what the Torah is all about, to be able to develop it and advance it to what it's meant to be. That's the concept. Right? That's the piece. Now, as a result of that, at the end of time, when they come with a claim, you have no claim. You turned it down. And the Jews accepted it, unequivocally. They didn't even ask what it's all about. The Mishkan at Sinai, the Jews, when we were given the Torah, due to our accepting it unequivocally, spiritually speaking, we reverted back to pre-sin of Adam. And the Gemara tells us, cites psukim, verses that we would have been eternal if not for Chet Egel. If we wouldn't have failed with the sin of golden calf, we would have been, the world would have achieved this level of perfection and we would have been eternal. We wouldn't have subject to death. However, because we failed with the Chet Egel, golden calf, therefore we reverted back post. The first luchos were broken. To be reinstated, we need a second set of tablets, but even that wasn't enough. We needed a mishkan. Make for me the sanctuary, and I will dwell in your midst. That was the medium through which God, but it was an arm's length relationship as a result of that. Now, the infrastructure of the Mishkan was divine design. Now, we know that there was the Holy of Holies. What was the Holy of Holies? Holies of Holies was the Aron, the Kapores. The Aron is basically a box, which is describing the Torah what it is. It had a covering on it, which is called Kapores. On the part of the covering, it was all made of gold. You had two cherubs, referred to Kruvim. That was that. What was contained within the Aron? You had the broken tablets, the Shivri Luchos, you had the second set of tablets, and you had the Torah. That was the Aron. Where was the Aron located? In the Kodesh Kadoshim, and the Holy of Holies. And there was a curtain separating between the Holy and the Holy of Holies. What was on the other side of the Holy of Holies, of that curtain? It was called the Heichal. It was the covered sanctuary. In the Heichal, you had the menorah, the golden candelabra on the southern side. You had the shulchan, the golden table with the 12 showbreads on the northern side. And in the middle, you had Mizbeach Hazov. You had the golden altar, which they would burn the incense on the altar. That was in the Heichal. And we mentioned many times that the Aron represents Torah Shebechsav. That's the written law. As we just said, the Luchos, the Torah itself, that's Torah Shebechsav, the written law. The menorah, which was on the other side of the curtain, which represents illumination, that's Torah Shebe'al Peh. That's the oral law. That's the elucidation of the written law. That's God's commentary. And to come upon its truth, you need special divine endowment to be able to come upon the truths of the Torah. We call Siyata Dishmaya, divine assistance. What activated that divine assistance? The lighting of the menorah. So what would have been the logical location where you should put the menorah? If the menorah itself, that illumination represents the elucidation of the written law, it should have been put alongside the Aron, which is Torah Shebechsav. But the Torah makes it a point. Make sure when you put that menorah, it should be michutz leparofis. It should be on the other side of the curtain. It should not be alongside the Aron. Why? What's the reason? So the Midrash explains, because I don't want you to think for a moment, le'orchem ani tzorich. I don't want you to think that I need your light. I don't need your light. Where the Aron was, that's where the Shekhinah, that's where the divine presence was. So he'd say, we have to illuminate. God needs our light. God says, I don't need your light. Put it on the other side. Keep it, don't keep it within my camp, so to say. Keep it on the other side. Because I don't want you to delude yourself to think I need your light. That's why it was on the other side. So Moshe Rabbeinu says to Hashem, if you don't need your light, our light, what are you asking us to light it? Why do we have to kindle it? I want you to light it, to illuminate, because to elevate you in the eyes of the nations of the world, to show them that I do need your light. And we're trying to pull the wool over the eyes of nations of the world. God says, I don't need your light. That's why you don't light it in the Holy of Holies. So we shouldn't delude ourselves. So Moshe says, so what do we light it? To elevate me in the eyes of the nations of the world, that they should understand, I do need your light. So does he need our light? Does he need our light? You know, we speak about the Midas Adin, the attribute of justice. We have the attribute of mercy. And based on our behavior, there's an evaluation made, and God responds and has a relationship with the world based on our behavior, the behavior of Jewish people. What about the behavior of the nations of the world? The behavior of the nations of the world has no bearing on the world scene, and it's only bearing on how God relates to them on their personal level, what he will do to them. But on the world scene, on the global level, what makes the world rise or fall, that's only based on the behavior of the Jew. The world was created for the Jew, for the Torah. If the Jew succeeds, the world advances. The Jew fails, the world is taken down. So all the fluctuations of the upside, downside, is all based upon what? Upon our behavior. So if that's the case, you would say, so God is locked into, when God created this world, he's locked into the behavior of the Jew. Could he override the system? That even when we're not deserving, God being the absolute, this is what we call Yichud Hashem. That's the unity of God. God overrides everything. Even though based on judgment, you deserve to be destroyed, be punished, God has the pardoning power. Because God is the absolute master of all existence. And he could override the court, regardless of what the court says. We have prosecuting angels, advocate angels, doesn't make a difference. God is the ultimate decision maker. So it's true. I'm elevating you in the eyes of the nations of the world. I need your behavior. I need your illumination. But that's under normal circumstances. But the times where based only God knows, God says, I'm going to override the system. I'll pardon you, or I'll do it differently. It's not up to the heavenly court what the predicament of the Jew should be. Therefore, if the menorah would be alongside the Aron, you would say, that we determine everything. God is locked into our behavior. God says, I want it on the other side. It should not be where the location of the divine presence is. So Moshe says, what are you asking us to write it? To elevate you in the eyes of the nations of the world, that factually the function of the world was based on your behavior. But if it ever comes to a time where I have to override the system, I have pardon power because I am the absolute. That's known as Yichud Hashem, that's Echad. Hashem Echad. He determines everything. The Midrash is an expression in the Midrash, it's Aramaic, Istalko Bereishis Bari Alma. What is the blueprint of existence? Person wants to build a house, goes to an architect, and they draw up a blueprint. What's the blueprint? What's the value of the blueprint? To accommodate ultimately the resident who's going to live in that house. So the architect interviews the person, says, what exactly do you want in this residence? How many rooms, the function, or whatever it is. And based on that, the blueprint is drawn up, and eventually the structure is built based on that blueprint. What is the blueprint for existence? So the Midrash says, it's Dalko Bereishis Bari Alma. The blueprint for existence is the Torah itself. If the world itself only exists because that's the location, that's the playing field, for every conceivable challenge, for the Jew to address what he has to advance within his spirituality, to fully flesh out his soul, that means those challenges have to exist within existence. So we have Taryag mitzvahs, we have 613 mitzvahs, 248 positive, 365 negative. That means all the challenges to achieve those positive or negative, not to cross lines, have to be part of existence because it's essential for our existence, for the purpose of our existence. So therefore, it's Istalko Bereishis Bari Alma. God looked in the Torah, he created the world. For instance, what's the law? A kosher species has a hide. Now, why did God create a kosher species with a hide? Based on a pasuk, on a verse in the Torah, the leather for tefillin, the parchment for the parchments that go into the tefillin, they have to be written on the hide of a kosher species. Even if the animal is killed, it's not ritually slaughtered, but it has to be the hide of a kosher species. A Sefer Torah, the parchment has to be written on the hide of a kosher species. If not, it's not valid. So because there's a mitzvah of tefillin, and tefillin, for whatever reason, requires the leather, and it has to be of a kosher species. God created firstly a kosher species, and that kosher species has a hide. Otherwise, it wouldn't be necessary. Just an example for this. Why did God, the Rav Kalatsky says this point, why did God create evil? God created evil that you should not do evil. That's why God created evil. Wasn't the challenge to be drawn towards evil, to do or not to do, it has to exist not to do it, that you should not do it. You know, Rav Kalatsky writes in the Mesillas Yesharim, in Path of the Just, that could you imagine, you're fighting a forefront battle. Every direction you turn, you're being challenged. Life is a forefront battle. From the moment we come into this existence till we die, every moment, 24/7, our existence, we're exposed to challenges. We don't even realize what kind of challenges. The more learned you are, the more you study, the more you understand. You appreciate, a person goes through a minefield and you don't realize you're in a minefield. Every moment your life is in jeopardy. When you come to, there's a minefield continuously. We don't even realize when we're victimized by making certain decisions or involve certain actions or exposing ourselves to certain environments where we're compromising our spirituality. But that's the reality of this existence. So, but why do these minefields exist? Because we're given all the mechanisms to be able to meet the challenges, to be able to deal and navigate our lives in this existence and come out on top and not be pulled down to the depths of spiritual Gehenna, spiritual hell. And these are the challenges of life. The Chofetz Chaim writes, the Gemara tells us based on Psukim that the evil inclination is like a fly, like a zvuv. He says usually when you engage with an enemy and you go to war, it could be a skirmish, it could be a battle. But if you beat your enemy and you beat him badly, the enemy doesn't come back, even though he eventually will come back when he rearms himself or regains the numbers that he has to. If he still wants to do battle, but it's not immediate. The evil a fly comes to one side himself. You swish it away, comes to the other side. It just doesn't go away. The evil inclination doesn't go away. As many times as you beat it, he gives you a challenge, you beat the challenge, you meet the challenge. There's another challenge, there's another challenge. It's unending, the challenges. That's exactly what the evil inclination is. And therefore the Rambam says that a Jew has an obligation to learn Torah till the last moment of his life. Because the only antidote that a person has to be able to see and appreciate what these challenges are, only if you have Torah. Yes. As a result of that, the Rambam says you have to study Torah till the last moment of your life, because the moment you stop studying Torah, you begin forgetting. And if you begin forgetting, you have these blind spots. You're disengaged. It's like you have a brownout. If you're fully engaged, you have the illumination. Ner mitzvah Torah, King Solomon says in Mishlei. The Torah is the illumination. Yes. What? One moment, please. This existence, every energy that exists within the existence is connected, is linked to every letter, every word of the Torah, based on the Jew. If you see this word, if you say that, it activates forces. And those forces, it's all because God made all these connections. It's like you have a system, very sophisticated system. You hook up the system, when you press the button, that button activates many consequences of pressing that button. You press the wrong button, it brings about negative consequence. The right button, and you're creating continuously new understandings and new levels of existence. That's what you're doing. And we're talking about worlds, spiritual worlds. You destroy worlds, you create worlds. And all these worlds, this is eternity. When a person leaves this existence, you have your life, which you created. Just end with one thing. The Ramak says, a person goes, and God forbid, he commits adultery. And afterwards, he denies he committed adultery. But there's a problem. The child that's born from the woman has an identical profile like the one who fathered that child. He looks like the adulterer. Could a person deny that it's not his child? The child looks at the words, it's his mamzer. It's his illegitimate child. That's yours. When a person sins based on the profile of the neshama, your impression is on that sin. You can't deny that you didn't do that sin. It's like a fingerprint. There are no two fingerprints which are identical. When you have your fingerprints there, you can't deny it's not your fingerprint. Of course, it can't be duplicated. Any challenge we have, when we make the challenge positive, negative, immediately has our imprint. It's our imprint. It's on that. So when a person is confronted with his record, say, well, it's not me. You can't say it's not you. Because every level of evidence, to the nth degree, it's irrefutable evidence in the positive and negative. And this all has relevance to the world to come. And to every decision that God makes. What our predicaments can be now, tomorrow, in the future, and part of eternity.